You had section 2, the frustration of his mission, why people weren't listening. Now, beginning in verse 25 to 30, you've got Jesus' self-description. It's been hidden deliberately. Why God would do this, one doesn't know, but he's hidden it from the wise and revealed it only to babes, people who are humble enough, the poor in spirit, who aren't in love with their own minds. They can accept it. And now he's telling us in such beautiful language, and I think this probably was a church formulation, almost a poem. It doesn't sound like Jesus actually speaking. This sounds like the church explaining the wonderful comfort and rest and peace that you get when you come to Christ. Verse 28, the end of section 11 on page 58. You know it because Handel has said it to some of the most beautiful music ever written. Come unto me, all ye who labor. Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens. And God notes that's all of us. And I will give you rest. Remember the Christmas hymn, O you beneath life's heavy load, whose backs are bending low, who toil along the weary road with something steps and slow. Awake to angels. Angels are coming down to lift our burden. The beautiful hymn. Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, all the burdens of life, and I will give you rest. Does it work? Yes, it does. Somehow, the contemplation of God and the intimacy with God and knowing that not a sparrow falls and not a thing, that the hairs of our heads are numbered, not a thing happens that he doesn't know, and he is our friend and our companion and our support. I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Isn't that what everybody wants? For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. What an idea. How can a yoke be easy? How can a burden be light? We were driving here this morning on Meeting Street, and there was a horse in harness in one of those tourist carts, and that horse wasn't happy. He was going back and forth, and there's something wrong with the way he was being tethered, or the thing in his mouth or something. And I thought a metaphor for the human race, sort of harnessed to life with all the burdens and illnesses we have as we get older and the problems we have. And yet, God makes it bearable. Yes?
I'd like to say something about the use of the word light.
Yes, indeed.
It is a double word, and he also has said, he said that he himself is light.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I see that light is a type of intelligence, love, and power that we can't fathom.
Do you mean light as in a candle, or light as not heavy?
Spiritual light.
Uh-huh.
Because he can take our burdens, because the burdens, when they're brought to this intelligence, love, and power that is the light, they can be transformed, and they don't bother him. In other words, it's like if you take a heavy package and you give it to me, I would go.
Right.
But he is made out of this light in some sense. And that's what his reality
Yes,
is.
very good observation. Well, look what he went through on the cross. I mean, I heard a Christmas sermon, or an Easter sermon, by a bishop in New York who had cancer of the throat, and so he talked through a kind of voice box, and he talked like this, and you had to strain forward to hear him. It was a big church. And he said, in the depth of my suffering, I found the crucified Christ. That God shares our suffering. What an idea. And so whatever we have to go through, he went through worse. And he does, because he bears the sorrow. Is there any sorrow like unto my sorrow? Of all of our sins and all of our failures and all of our burdens. He carries them all. That is an idea that is such a comfort and such, it's like when I was in the hospital with a post-operative infection. I was in agony, and they kept giving me Dilaudid. And the doctor said, well, I don't want to give you so much that you're completely knocked out. I said, but that's what I want. Because the pain doesn't go away, but you have it, but you don't care. You're sort of, it's all bearable. It's caught up in something bigger. And if you have this eternal and infinite consciousness, which is religion, then your little problems pale in comparison to the overwhelming reality of God. It's all caught up in something infinitely larger. And we understand that the suffering is a universal thing. And somehow the yoke of it, the burden of it, can be made light when you know that God and all humanity shares it. It's a strange consciousness to be bent under burdens and yet to be free, to be liberated. That's why Easter and Passover are such great holidays. We were bound to Pharaoh in Egypt, and the Lord our God broke those chains. Christ is bound in the tomb, and God breaks open the door. And that's why the egg, as I've said, is the common symbol of Easter and Passover. You'll see an egg on each table Saturday night. The chick breaks out of the shell, the way Christ breaks out of the tomb and Israel breaks out of slavery. Yes, sir?
Is that a first century common Christian Jewish concept about a suffering God? It seems Hillel advances it. It seems to advance by the
I think the people who... Yes. When the Jews went into exile, God went into exile. The doctrine of divine sparks is a mystical Jewish doctrine in the Kabbalah. If you ever want to have your brain explode, try to read the Kabbalah. And there are English translations. Unbelievable. The world was made with black fire on top of white fire. I mean, who can understand what the images mean? But fantastic images. And the idea of a suffering God is certainly found there. And the Messiah is a personification of the Jewish people who suffer through history. But I think the first one to talk about it was Jeremiah, the suffering prophet of a suffering God. And you don't know, and he wrote, what, about 6 something BC. You don't know whether he's talking in the first person about his own suffering or the suffering of God, because the voice of the prophet and the voice of God mix. So the suffering God, and then in Hosea, God is Israel's husband, and Israel's unfaithful to him. And he comes into, I imagine God coming into the psychoanalyst's office and lying down on the couch and saying, "Doctor, my wife is unfaithful. She's running around with other guys," meaning other gods, other ultimate commitments. "And I'm going to go home and I'm going to strangle her. I hate what, but I love her. I can't kill her. I love her." And that's why it's so painful. And God goes back and forth in Hosea and Jeremiah between fury with his wife or his child, Israel sometimes the child, sometimes the wife, and then saying, "But I love her so much, I can't hurt her. I want her to come back to me." Like a father who says, "If you keep acting this way, my daughter, if you're under my roof, you keep coming back at 2 a.m. with that boyfriend, get out." He doesn't mean get out, he means don't leave me. But he says the opposite of what he means. Says a line that we say on Yom Kippur, "Is this not Ephraim, my beloved son, my beloved child? Even when I speak against him, I remember him with affection, saith the Lord." So God is a frustrated father who suffers because he loves us. He's stuck with us. He loves us. He can't help that. And therefore, all of our sins and all of our failings and all of our suffering become his suffering. Jeremiah came up with that, and Christianity really grabbed that and ran with it. The suffering God hanging on the cross is the essence of Christianity. It's an important idea in Judaism, but the essence of Christianity. All right. "You will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And some, again, paradox. No religion is as rich paradoxically, in paradox, as is Christianity. An easy yoke and a burden that's light. Seeming contradiction. And yet, if you've experienced it, you know what he's talking about. Billy Graham said, if you have God in your heart, you can stand at the grave of your beloved and weep and mourn and still feel joy. Because you're somehow caught up in something much larger. And I've told you the story about the Buddha. A woman comes to him and said, "My son is dead. I can't stand the pain. Give me a potion to cure the pain." And he says, "Take this bowl, go into the town yonder, and knock on every door. And in every place where they've never experienced the loss of a beloved, get a mustard seed and come back, and your bowl will be full of mustard seeds from those houses where this kind of suffering and loss has not been known, and I'll make you a potion to drink and it'll cure you. She comes back a month later, and of course the bowl's empty, because there's not a household on earth that hasn't experienced the terrible loss of a beloved. Suffering is the universal human condition, and yet so is comfort and redemption, fall and redemption, suffering and comfort, life through death, the crown, but first the cross, and the paradoxes. But that's true to life, which is paradoxical. All right, that's the end of chapter 11. The third section, Jesus explains himself and calls us to him to come. Maybe he means my yoke is easy, my burden is light. One meaning may be, unlike the Pharisees who have so many laws and rules, I don't have any. It's just simple. Love. All right, chapter 12. Now we're going to have two conflicts with Pharisees, both over Sabbath violations. Now, what are they doing here? It's sort of out of place. See, Mark has them in a very clear place at the beginning of the gospel. Here, Matthew just takes them from Mark, but he just plops them down here. So the context puzzles me, but the stories themselves are quite good. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. We can picture that. Chapter 12, verse 1. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. Well, today that would be a Sabbath violation. I observe the Jewish Sabbath, and on the Sabbath I would not do this, because it's doing violence to God's creation. And on the Sabbath we're supposed to not labor, but just think about the labor that was God's when he built this wonderful world. Also, I'm creating. You're not supposed to create on the Sabbath. I'm creating two pieces out of one. So on two grounds, you can't pluck grain. It would be like tearing the creation. Not on the Sabbath. There are many things you can't do on the Sabbath, but Jesus doesn't go in for those ritual rules. Look, say the Pharisees. And they would say, your disciples are doing something not lawful on the Sabbath. It may not be the biggest sin of the world, but if you're a rabbi, they shouldn't be doing it. And he said, he defends himself. Have you not read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? And it's true in the book of Samuel. David is fleeing from crazy King Saul, who wants to kill young David. Because Saul knows as long as David is alive, Saul's own son Jonathan will never be king. David will be, because he's a superior guy. So David and his band are fleeing from Saul, who's trying to kill him, and they go to a shrine city, which is inhabited all by priests, a pre-Jerusalem shrine. And they're so hungry, they go to the gold table where there were 12 loaves of bread representing the 12 tribes of Israel, which were baked daily and kept fresh before the Lord, before the altar. And he ate the bread. You're not supposed to eat that bread. You just look at it. This happened. I was with a student of mine who had no background in religion at all. He was a philosophy major, but his mother was something of a religious fanatic, so he rejected all religion. He took all my philosophy courses. He took one Bible course and fell asleep. It's not easy to fall asleep when I'm carrying on the way I do. And he did, so I hit him with a rolled-up newspaper, but it did no good. He had a resistance to religion. Well, he came down to visit me in Charleston. I needed a companion to drive back, because I don't like to drive alone on long drives. I tend to fall asleep. And there we get to Washington, to the church of my dearest old friend Vincent Rigdon. You may have met him, Father Rigdon. He comes down for Spoleto. And he was saying Mass. And we went into the rectory, and Irvin, the kid, said, I'm so hungry. And we opened the refrigerator, and priests are like other bachelors. They have empty refrigerators. There's nothing to eat. I said, we'll suck on some ice. We'll be going out to dinner in an hour. I can't wait. And he said, oh, I found something. And I was sitting in the living room. He's coming in eating communion wafers. Well, they weren't consecrated, but still. Just chewing. It's like Trump. Oh, I'm a Christian. I eat my cookie. I go to church and eat the cookie. That's the body of Christ to him is a cookie. So this boy meant no harm, but I was reminded of this. So David eats the bread you're not allowed to eat. Why? Because his followers were hungry. The point being that in case of human need, the ritual law can be trumped. You know, we can never use that word again. Can be trumped by human need, by an ethical consideration of caring for people. David, the great King David, allowed his followers to eat the holy bread which wasn't supposed to be eaten. That's example number 1. Or verse 5, example number 2. There are all kinds of things you're not supposed to do on the Sabbath. You're certainly not supposed to kill anything. You can't even pluck a flower. But the priests in the temple slaughtered animals. Extra animals were slaughtered on Saturday morning in the temple. So the priests, he says in verse 5, break the Sabbath in order to observe the Sabbath. An interesting paradox. And that's technically true. But I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. They violated the bread of the temple, and they violated the laws against killing on the temple and cutting up things. But I tell you something or someone greater than the temple is here. Jesus trumps that. But, if I say my disciples can violate a minor law, in case of human need, fine. Now, Judaism said, the Pharisee religion said, in case of life or death situations, of course you could eat forbidden bread or you could violate the Sabbath. But not just in a case of minor human need, like I'm hungry. Jesus relaxed this, as he relaxed many regulations. All ritual regulations. He always goes in for the ethical over the ritual. Something greater than the temple is here. I'm here. But if you had known what this means, now he quotes Hosea chapter 6, verse 6, a great prophet of the 700s BC. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. He puts himself squarely in the history and tradition of the Jewish prophets, not the Jewish priests who were the ritual guys, but the prophets. And Hosea said, God doesn't care about animal sacrifice. You fellas have it all wrong. He cares about mercy and compassion and kindness, and that's exactly what Jesus believes. Jeremiah, another forerunner of Jesus, went to the temple, and everybody's coming there for a big Jewish holiday. By the hundreds of thousands, he says, go home, go home. Why are you trampling my courts, saith the Lord? Go home and be decent human beings. That's what matters. These rituals don't matter. It's exactly like today, you might ask a priest, what makes me a good Christian? First of all, you've got to go to church on Sunday. That's number one answer. You ask someone else, what makes a person a good Christian? He'd say, believing in the creed. Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit. If you recite that and believe it, you're a good Christian. That's answer two. Very different from going to church. Then the third answer would be, and there may be 4 or 5, but I can think of 3. You want to be a good Christian? Be a good human being. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's everything. The rest is secondary. So there you have, even today, 3 very different answers as to what makes a good Jew or a good Christian. And you have to decide for yourself. Jesus is certainly on the side of ethical, moral conduct, and not on the side of ritual. Every dispute he has with the Pharisees, probably except for the bad company dispute, is a ritual dispute. He outdoes them on ethics. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. And then he says, verse 8, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. That sums everything up. Now it's ambiguous. Does he mean, here in this translation, Son of Man is capitalized? Of course, Hebrew has no capital letters. And so Jesus said it in Aramaic, no capital letters. The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. So, what does it mean? What are 2 things it can mean? It can mean that Jesus, here I am, and I am superior to the temple, the Sabbath, or any of this, because this is the turn of the age, the culmination of history. Well, I am here on earth with you. So the old rules don't apply. That's one. And yet elsewhere he'll say, not one jot or tittle shall be taken from the law. I don't think Matthew can quite decide what his position is. Is this Jesus speaking here, first of all, or Matthew? We don't know. But look how ambiguous it is. It may mean that Jesus is superior to the Sabbath or the temple or the old ways, but it may also mean Son of Man can mean anybody, B'nai Adam, Ben Adam. We're all sons of man. So in the book of Ezekiel in the Old Testament, Son of Man just means a human being. In the book of Daniel, it means the one who comes with clouds from heaven to judge the world at the end of time. So when Jesus is called Son of Man by the gospel writers, I think they probably mean the second thing. People don't understand, they don't think that way. Most Christians I know say he was the Son of God, he was divine, he was the Son of Man, he was human. Fine, a nice formulation, but I don't think that's what the gospel writers mean. When they say Son of Man, I think they mean the exalted one who comes with clouds of heaven, who is human but is infinitely more. Now remember, the Messiah for the Jews was to be a great human being, not divine. But as the years went by, the idea of the Messiah probably originated in Jeremiah, which would make it the 600s BC, and picked up by 2nd Isaiah. This ideal future king, but a human being, it morphed into the Son of Man idea. The Son of Man, and I saw a throne, and on it was the Ancient of Days. His hair was white as wool, beautiful image in Daniel chapter 7. And there came one like a Son of Man, with clouds of heaven, and to him was given authority to judge and redeem the world. That's what the gospel writers mean. He's here now. He's here as a humble servant, but he will return with clouds of glory. And that's what Christians now await. All right, so I think he's saying that Jesus is is the Lord of the Sabbath, superior to the Sabbath, but it could also mean that in case of human need, anybody's entitled to violate the Sabbath, because human beings, human need... No, sorry. I have to answer it because it may be the hospital. Hello? Who is this? Hi, Irvin. Look, I'm in the middle of a class. Let me call you back this afternoon. Okay. Bye-bye. That's the student who ate the communion wafers. All right. All right, so here we have a simple verse. The Son of Man is Lord. It could mean everybody, human life is more important than regulations and rules. Or it can mean the superiority of Jesus. Either way, it can mean both. All right. Now we come to the second Sabbath violation argument. So chapter 12 is about two conflicts with the Pharisees, at least the beginning, over the Sabbath. 12:9. He left that place and entered the synagogue. And a man was there with a withered hand. And they asked him, is it lawful to cure on the Sabbath? But it's not an honest question. In Mark, it's an honest question. Here, they're trying to trap him. Because for Matthew, there's no such thing as a good Pharisee. The most interesting example of the contrast there is that in Mark, when Jesus is in the temple courtyard in the last week of his life, Holy Week, a man comes up to him, a lawyer, so that means probably a Pharisee, and he says, what's the greatest commandment? And Jesus turns to the right and says, well, what do you think? And, well, love the Lord your God and your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus and the man bond over that. And he says, you're right. You're not far from the kingdom of heaven. Because loving God and your fellow man is much more important, and Jesus must have pointed across the courtyard to where they were sacrificing the animals, than all those sacrifices. And he and this Pharisee bonded, and they agreed. When Matthew tells the story, and we'll get to that in a few weeks, he completely leaves out this good Pharisee who agrees with Jesus. Because from Matthew, there can be no good Pharisee. So he's much more ideological and doctrinaire than Mark. All right. They ask him, Is it lawful to cure on the Sabbath? Now the answer is, under certain circumstances, no. Under certain circumstances, yes. And that's what's going to make this such an interesting episode. He said to them, next page, verse 11, page 60. Suppose one of you has a sheep and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath. You're going to leave it down there at the bottom of the pit? No, of course you'd lift it out. So if you do that on the Sabbath to save an animal, verse 12, how much more valuable is a human being than a sheep? Now Jesus had made this comparison with animals before. Sparrows fall, and you're much more valuable than the sparrow. The lilies of the field, how beautiful, but you're more valuable. It's very intense religious humanism. The human being is the most precious thing in God's heart, as God should be the most precious to us. How much more valuable is a human being than a sheep? So, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. That is, in this case, to cure this man. So, to do good is ethical, Sabbath is ritual. So, of course, he, as usual, chooses the ethical over the ritual. Verse 13, and having said that, and answered their question, yes, it is lawful to cure on the Sabbath, he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And he stretched it out, and it was restored, as sound as the other. But the Pharisees are infuriated, and they went out and conspired against him how to destroy him. I doubt that's the case. Pharisees were always arguing religious issues. And Jesus was not the only one who would differ with the Southern Baptist version of the Pharisees that he seems to find here. But they didn't destroy each other over it. I mean, that's what they spent their time doing. I believe it was the Sadducees and the Romans that conspired in Jesus' death. I don't think the Pharisees had anything to do with it. But Matthew hates the Pharisees so. And of course, remember, in Matthew's day in 85 AD, that there weren't any functioning Sadducees for 15 years because the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, and their whole function was offering sacrifices in the temple. I mean, I'm a Sadducee. I'm a descendant of the Kohanim. Kogan means Cohen, Kohen. And I give certain blessings to the people in the synagogue. But I don't go around sacrificing animals, though there's a particular pussycat I think could use sacrificing. But that's different. The point is, they were at the people that Matthew was contending against. Remember, I remind you of the situation. 85 AD, 15 years ago, the temple was destroyed. Now the Sadducees are gone, the Essenes are gone, the Zealots are certainly gone, who ran that foolish revolution against the Romans. No Jewish sects left except the Pharisees and the Nazarenes, who will become the rabbinic Jews and the Christians. So Matthew is arguing against the Pharisees, against the alternate Jewish school of the Pharisees that's still extant, and wanting Jews to come to them to reformulate the religion after the destruction of the temple. But the Christians are saying, no, 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 we're the true Israel, you come to us. So that's the reason he's so incredibly hostile to the Pharisees. It's a life and death struggle between the Christian version of Judaism and the Pharisee version. And there's no love lost between them. The Pharisees were saying things just as bad about the Christians as the Christians are here about the Pharisees. Yes, sir.
On this one example, because they not have said, hey, we got to destroy him because the argument is all right to do on the Sabbath was a theoretical one, so nobody would kill somebody like this. But he proved it wasn't theoretical.
All right, but now let me say the next thing I have to say about this. The reason that this whole episode puzzles me, and Mark puts it at the end of 5 conflicts with the Pharisees, most of which are historically accurate, but the last one isn't. And he takes this from Mark. And I'll tell you why this either couldn't have happened or Jesus ran into an aberrant group of Pharisees. In the Talmud, which is the Pharisee document par excellence, there is a whole listing of what kind of cures you can do on the Sabbath and what kind of cures you cannot do. You cannot grind medicine, because that's doing violence to the creation. You cannot reach out and straighten a man's crooked hand. But you can do it by incantation. what they call healing by incantation is allowed on the Sabbath. And this is what this is. He said, stretch out your hand. He didn't touch him. So from the Talmud, Jesus is the one who's right on Jewish law. This kind of healing through the word, remember I said there are two kinds of healing with Jesus. The word or laying on of hands. The laying on of hands may be forbidden on the Sabbath, but not by the word. And that's what Jesus does. So these Pharisees, these particular Pharisees, are wrong. And Jesus is right, not just according to the ethical reality of the world, but wrong according to the technical Jewish law. So either this didn't happen, and it's just church propaganda showing how hard-hearted the Pharisees are and how wonderful Jesus is, or he ran into a group of Pharisees so extreme that they did not agree with the ultimate Pharisee position, which was you can heal by the word on the Sabbath. So it's a very puzzling episode. And so that's why when they say they went off to destroy him, I don't buy the whole thing. I don't think it happened. I just think it's Matthew saying, you see how compassionate we are and how cruel they are. Because otherwise, I mean, Jesus is in the right as far as Jewish law is concerned. So it's a very puzzling episode. He may have run into a very peculiar, extreme group of Pharisees. But again, he's then upholding the dominant position in Jewish law. Now, we go on. Jesus, verse 15a, page 60, chapter 12. When Jesus became aware of this, that they were plotting to destroy him. So this is a warning of the crucifixion to come, a warning of the suffering to come. He became aware of the danger, and he departed. There's a threat, and he wants to escape it because he may know he's going to die ultimately, but he doesn't want it to happen now. Many crowds followed him. This is one of these generalizations, a summary verse. Many crowds followed him, and he cured all of them. So we have two episodes of Sabbath violation, the second one of curing on the Sabbath, and then a generalized statement that he cured many people. One of his major functions was as a faith healer. And verse 16, he ordered them not to make him known. Now in Mark, what we call the messianic secret is often mentioned. I'll cure you, but don't tell anyone about it. That's only true in Jewish territory in Mark. When Jesus passes over into Gentile territory, he says, go and tell everybody what the Lord has done for you. He says that to the Gerasene demoniac. What's the difference? I think it's the church's way of explaining why the Gentiles converted in larger numbers than the Jews. That it was part of God's plan. Just as God hides the truth from the wise and intelligent and reveals it to babes, to the simple. That's part of his plan. Part of his plan is that the Jews would not accept what Jesus was saying, and the Gentiles would. And that made Christianity a world religion rather than just a new kind of Judaism. It's all part of God's plan. And the messianic secret is a way of explaining why the Jews didn't get it, but the Gentiles did. Interesting. Now Matthew picks it up.